Today, I want to share with you who I think America's 25 best college football teams will be in 2024. The season is only 10 days away, and the AP and Coaches Poll top 25s are out, so I want to give you all my top 25. But unlike those top 25s, my top 25 is not based off of vibes or feelings or predicting the end of season strength of record for these teams. Gosh, I really don't like the word vibes, but whatever. My top 25 is more of a power ranking or power rating of the 25 best teams in college football as I see it. And the criteria for that is how I think each of these teams would do against an average, above average, good top 20, top 25 Power 4 team. How these teams would do against Power 4 teams that are competitive, that matter, that can at least compete for a playoff spot or more. So how each of these teams will do against really the top half of the Power 4 or all of the Power 4 and the better group of 5 teams, that's really what I'm concerned with. And that includes coaching, the head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, assistants, strength and conditioning coach. I take that into account. I take into account the roster. How good's your quarterback? Is he even dual threat or pro style? How deep are your receivers and skill position players? And how does your defense look? What about special teams? So roster, depth, talent as well. So recruiting's a little in there. And schedule even too. I said this is not a strength of record based top 25 or predicting strength of record exactly because I don't know for certain or 100% how everything's going to pan out. And I've done my research and I've done my homework, but I think power rankings, power ratings are more of an honest way of how to rank the 25 best teams in all of college football. So let's kick it off and get started. And here at 25th, I have the Kansas State Wildcats. Kansas State returns 63% of their production from 2023. They bring back 11 starters. The strength of this team, with running back DJ Giddens returning, I think will be the rushing offense. Hadley Panzer is one of 5 2023 starting offensive linemen who's back. Carver Willis and Easton Kitty are some other players to pay attention to on this offensive line. I think it will be good, despite the fact that they lose so much production and an NFL player like Cooper Beebe from that unit. Linebacker and cornerback are rooms that also impress me. Pay attention to Jacob Parrish and Marquise Sigel in that room. I think that losing Ben Sinnott, losing Will Howard to Ohio State, and Avery Johnson being a new starter, I think Avery Johnson has a higher ceiling than Will Howard and will probably end up being a better quarterback, but that may take some time. And then losing the primary pass catchers and having a new offensive line, I think will result in this passing offense taking a step back. You also have to remember that Colin Klein left for Texas A&M, so a lot of changes on that offense. That's the storyline for this season. I think Kansas State's ceiling is 11-1, their floor is 7-5. I have them going 10-3 with a 7-2 record in Big 12 conference play, losing to LSU in the Texas Bowl. Up next, we have Oklahoma State at 24th. They return a whopping 85% of their 2023 production. They also bring back 20 starters. Their strength is obviously going to be the rushing offense with Ollie Gordon, and also that offensive line, because center Joe Michalski and guard Preston Wilson, tackles Dalton Cooper and Jake Springfield make up one of the best offensive lines in the country. They have underrated wide receivers in Brennan Presley and Rashad Owens, and at linebacker, Nick Martin and Colin Oliver might be the 2 best linebackers in the country. They could be up there with Nick Jackson and Jay Higgins as one of the best starting linebacker duos in college football. But despite their strength at linebacker, they do have questions on passing defense. Their defensive line was mediocre last year. Their secondary stunk. The storyline for Oklahoma State is, can Brian Nardo improve the defense? It allowed nearly 30 points per game last season. And you saw when they played Texas in the Big 12 championship game how far away they were. I have them going 11-2, 7-2 in Big 12 conference play, beating Kentucky in the Liberty Bowl. I think their ceiling's 11-1. Their floor is 8-4. At 23rd, we have the Iowa State Cyclones. Like Oklahoma State, they bring back a gargantuan amount of production from the prior season. That works in their favor. Proven results coming back. Also returning starters works in their favor. Same with having a young quarterback who showcased he can be good in Rocco Becht coming back. And a defense that matters, particularly a passing defense, but also good linebackers and defensive linemen. With Jalen Noel coming back at wide receiver, and also Jaden Higgins, their receivers are going to be a strength of this team. Same with their tight end, Benjamin Brahmer. Linebacker with Caleb Bacon and Will McLaughlin, and then safety with Jeremiah Cooper, Bro Freeler, and Malik Verdon. They run a 3-safety, 3-3-5 defense there. Their passing defense is going to be impressive, and this defense could be one of the best in the country if properly managed. Their running offense, with an offensive line that performed poorly last year and a new starting running back, that's an area where I think there are questions. The storyline is, can Heacock utilize this defense that returns nearly 4/5 of its production from last year? I think Iowa State could win the Big 12, but they do have a tough schedule. I have them missing the Big 12 championship game, losing to Clemson in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, with a 9-4 record to close out the year, 7-2 in conference. They have a ceiling of 10-2 and a floor of 7-5. We have the Tennessee Volunteers at 22nd. They only bring back 48% of their production and 8 starters from 2023. That's a lot less than I would have expected. But I actually think Tennessee will take steps forward this year, or at least overall be a similar team to what they were last season. Why? Nico Iamaleava. It's as simple as that. He'll be a top 10 QB this year. Tennessee also returns a elite defensive end, an All-American in my opinion, in James Pierce Jr. Omar Norman-Lott is another player to pay attention to at defensive tackle on that line. Dylan Sampson strong at running back. Squirrel White is impressive at wide receiver along with Dante Thornton. I think at the skill positions, this team will be impressive. And if everything can come together, they could once again have a 2022 type offense, mainly looking at the offensive line and if they come together. Their weakness, I think, will be the passing defense. They do have some questions there, but an elite offense can alleviate that weak spot. If Nico is a star, perhaps better than even I think, Tennessee could be a college football playoff, SEC championship, potentially national championship contender. They were 33rd in QBR last year, which given Heupel's offense requiring an elite quarterback to be an elite offense, that was not good enough. So that's the storyline, and I think Nico will be awesome. Not the best quarterback in the nation, not a Heisman winner like Greg McElroy thinks, and I think that's actually a pretty smart pick on his part, but a near elite QB. I have them going to the Las Vegas Bowl and beating Colorado, finishing with a 10-3 record, 5-3 in SEC conference play. I think their ceiling is 10-2, their floor is 8-4. At 21st, we have the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Rutgers brings back 72% of their production and 14 starters from 2023. Kyle Monangai at running back will assist them in having one of the country's most productive offenses, particularly by statistics, because their schedule's easy. Gus Zelinskis, Brian Felter, and Aholin Pierce are players to watch on their offensive line, who are veterans and some of the nation's best. Mohamed Toure and Tyreen Powell are elite linebackers, and their defensive backs, which feature Flip Dixon, Robert Longerbeam, and others, should give them an edge in pass defense. I think their rushing offense is an ultimate strength of theirs. Their passing offense is weak because of Ethan Kaliakmanis not being an impressive quarterback from what we know and from what we've seen, and Johnny Langan leaving at tight end gives them a little hole there. If the offense can balance out and score more touchdowns, Rutgers will be successful. That's the storyline to follow, is how efficient is their offense this year in scoring touchdowns, because they have a great kicker in Patel. The question is, can they punch it in the end zone? I have them losing to Texas A&M in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, finishing with a 10-3 record, 7-2 in Big Ten Conference play, an 11-1 ceiling, but a 6-6 floor. Wide ranges of outcomes for Rutgers. It's similar, I think, with the 20th ranked Nebraska Cornhuskers. Nebraska returns 71% of their production and 14 starters. Now, one of their best players on the team, I think, is newcomer, true freshman, in fact, Dylan Raiola. I think that he is going to have an awesome year, and I think the season hinges on him. Nebraska was 108th in QBR last year. If Raiola is awful, Nebraska is flirting with missing a bowl game again for now the 8th year in a row. If he is awesome, this team can go 10-2 and perhaps get into the college football playoff. I think that their floor is 6-6, so I think this team's going bowling almost no matter what. And that's because they got Emmett Johnson, Dante Dowdle, Gabe Irvin Jr., and Ramir Johnson in a deep running back room. Jamal Banks comes in at wide receiver. Nash Hutmacher anchors a strong defensive line. And Isaac Gifford, Tommy Hill, Bly Hill, and others are in a secondary that could be one of the nation's best this season if things go right. I think the offensive line has questions. Part of that is because of Prohaska's injury and also some question marks they had last season. But I think Nebraska will be good. They'll manage their schedule well and go to a bowl game and beat the Oklahoma Sooners in the Music City Bowl, finishing with a 10-3 record, 6-3 in Big Ten Conference play, a 10-2 ceiling, and a 6-6 floor. At 19th, we have the LSU Tigers. Now, around here, I don't know if it's here exactly, just because I don't think there's necessarily a strong argument for a clear separation in these seedings right now, or rankings, seedings, whatever you want to call them, until the top 10. But I think around here, you may see a sizable separation in how these teams would do on a neutral field versus a good Power 4 team. LSU has all the talent in the world to succeed. They bring back 64% of their production and 12 starters on top of that. At wide receiver, they brought in transfer Xavion Thomas and another transfer from Liberty in C.J. Daniels. They should be strong there. Their strength of this team is ultimately their O-line, which is anchored by Will Campbell and Emory Jones Jr., two elite tackles. Garrett Dellinger is also a good guard. Garrett Nussmeier, I think, will be a pretty great quarterback this season. I think the passing offense will be good. I think it's a good system for Nussmeier. I think he'll adjust quickly, and by the middle of the season, this offense will be humming. And their special teams will be good, too. Damian Ramos comes back, and they have a good punter. The pass defense, though, will continue to be the woe of this defense like it was last season. It won't be nearly as bad with Blake Baker, and I think Bo Davis will better be able to utilize and develop the talent on the D-line. But this defense will not become elite in 1 year. If Blake Baker can somehow do that, this team is a national championship contender. But they were awful in defense, outside of the top 100 in ESPN's FPI efficiency, somehow worse than LSU's. I have LSU going 9-4, 5-3 in SEC conference play, beating Kansas State in the Texas Bowl with an 11-1 ceiling and an 8-4, maybe 7-5 floor. At 18th, this is a team that I think has a crazy high ceiling given its roster talent. They do have a limitation. I don't think they can win it all, but they can perhaps be a Cinderella story in the playoff. They could also just be an above-average Power 4 team. That's the Kansas Jayhawks. They only bring back 59% of their production and 13 starters, but almost all the starters they bring back, in my opinion, are X-Factor players. This includes quarterback, who didn't start last season but was great when healthy, Jalen Daniels. Devin Neal is up there, I think, with Ollie Gordon in terms of running back talent, and Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Donovan Edwards. Daniel Highshaw Jr. is also good. An offensive line that features Bryce Foster, Kobe Baines, Bryce Cabledew, and Michael Ford Jr. should be one of the best offensive lines in the Big 12, perhaps nationally. Lawrence Arnold, Quentin Skinner, and Luke Grimm at wide receiver, and then Jared Casey and Deshaun Hanukkah make up an awesome receiver core. A defensive end with Jeremy Robinson and Dylan Woodkey, and cornerback with Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson. This pass defense, factoring in the pass rush, can be good too. Defensive tackle and linebacker are areas that I have questions with, same with special teams, but more importantly is the roster ceiling. I think that is the biggest limiting factor to a team in Kansas that has so many X-Factor players and that has a head coach who is just so good at utilizing talent. They did lose Andy Kotelnicki to Penn State, so a question for Kansas is whether the success on offense will continue with Jeff Grimes, but I think it will, particularly in the ground game. I have Kansas finishing with a 12-2 record, playing Utah in the Big 12 championship game, but losing, and then beating Oregon State in the Alamo Bowl. I have them finishing with an 8-1 Big 12 conference record. Their ceiling is going 12-0, being undefeated, and perhaps being a top 15, maybe top 10 team at the best, but I don't think they can win it all, again, due to talent and roster limitations. Their floor is 8-4. Believe me when I say, even with all their losing, Lance Leipold is going to coach these guys up. I think he's a top 10 head coach nationally. At 17th, we have the Wisconsin Badgers. Wisconsin, their schedule is, I think, the toughest so far that we have covered, though there will be tougher schedules as we go on in this video. But they bring back 68% of their production. This factors in incoming transfers. They were one of these schools that used the portal well. They returned 10 starters. They got Tyler Van Dyke from Miami, who I think will be pretty good and in the top half of all Big Ten quarterbacks. At wide receiver, they are strong with Will Pauling in that room. And Wisconsin is also strong on the offensive line with Joe Huber at guard and Riley Malaman and Jack Nelson at tackle. At defensive end, Darrell Peterson, John Pius, and at linebacker, Tackett Curtis are some defensive players to pay attention to. Most importantly, you have Ricardo Hallman and you have Hunter Wohler, who are some elite secondary players in college football and in the Big Ten. The offensive line is the non-negotiable for this team that people will have to deal with, in my opinion. The weakness of this team is tight end and also defensive line. Their defensive line with their 3-3-5 defense is only 3 men starting, which already makes it weaker than other defensive lines, at least typically, and they don't have a lot of strong depth there. So that, along with their offense in general, can it improve from barely scoring over 3 touchdowns last year? Those are the questions and storylines to pay attention to. I have Wisconsin finishing with an 8-5, 6-3 record in Big Ten Conference play, losing to Texas, an underachieving Texas team in the ReliaQuest Bowl. Their ceiling is 10-2. Their floor is 5-7. I think with a head coach like Luke Fickell, they're going to improve compared to last season. At 16th, we have Texas A&M. Texas A&M has underachieved for years, oftentimes being this close in games against Alabama. I remember in 2019, they almost beat Georgia. They have been competitive with LSU over the previous few seasons when LSU's on average fielded better teams, so on and so forth. Jimbo Fisher was a fraud at Texas A&M, and he kept being ranked inside of the top 10 year over year over year over year. I'm glad that for the last 2 seasons, I didn't fall for his team being like a top 15, top 10 team. Thought they would bounce back last year in terms of power rankings from 2022, and they did a little bit, but at the end of the year, he got fired. Their strength, though, this is in part credit to Jimbo Fisher, actually, is quarterback Connor Weigman, a wide receiver Moose Muhammad. On the defensive line, they have guys like Nick Scorton, who I think is an All-American, Shamar Turner as well. At linebacker, they have Tareen York. And at cornerback, Will Lee II, Tyreek Chappelle, and B.J. Mays. That's a pretty good cornerback room, in my opinion. Offensive guard and really the whole offensive line has questions, but I think the interior of the trenches are a bigger question on both sides of the line of scrimmage than the exterior, and they're going to have to find someone to step up at tight end. Can Elko manage the talent of this team from ground zero? Like in week 1, can he hit the ground running? I think he can. I have yet to see, like all of us, if he will, but I think A&M will be successful this year. That's why I have them going to the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl and beating Rutgers and finishing with a 10-3, 6-2 record in the SEC with an 11-1 ceiling and a 7-5 floor. The passing offense of this team with Colin Klein, watch out. This is the opposite case for Iowa, even though they hired Tim Lester. Iowa slots in at 15th in my rankings. For Iowa, they return 79% of their production in 17 starters. You know the defense is going to be awesome, and the offensive line, they return a lot. Same with tight end with Luke Lachey and Addison Ostrenga. Logan Jones and Connor Colby, pay attention to them on the line. On defense, you got Deontay Craig, Ethan Hurkett, Aaron Graves, and Yaya Black on the D-line. Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson at linebacker. Nwampka, Xavier Nwampka, Quinn Schulte, Sebastian Castro, Deshaun Lee, and John Nestor at secondary. Those are all of their starters. They're all going to be good. And Drew Stevens comes back at kicker. You know their defense is going to be elite. I think it'll be the best in the country. The question is the offense. Can Cade McNamara or Brendan Sullivan step up? And can the wide receivers improve? Kirk Ferentz said his offense can be good. If they are just good, which in my opinion would be top 50 at Iowa, or somehow if they're top 25, this team immediately becomes a contender for the Big Ten, and a serious contender. I have Iowa going 11-1, reaching the college football playoff. I think they're going to choke all of their opponents out of oxygen, except for Ohio State on the road, and reach the playoffs. But I think they'll lose on the road to Penn State in the first round, finishing 11-2, 8-1 in Big Ten Conference play. With an 11-1 ceiling, I think they're going to lose at Ohio State guaranteed. If they somehow beat Ohio State, they may slip up somewhere else. But I think, again, that's an auto loss, and they'll have a floor of 8-4. We have the Oklahoma Sooners up next at 14th. Now, you may wonder why I have Oklahoma. If you're watching on YouTube, you see all of this at once on the screen, all the information that I spout out. You may be wondering why I have the Sooners losing to a team that I have power rated behind them in the Cornhuskers in the bowl game. We'll get to that. Oklahoma returns 8 starters, 65% of their returning of their production from 2023. It's pretty redundant to say you return X amount of returning production, but it happens to the best of us. Running back with Gavin Sawchuk is going to be a spot of strength. And the offensive line, while it does have questions, I think Branson Hickman will at least be the strength of this unit. Receiver with Nick Anderson, Deion Burks, Andrell Anthony is going to be phenomenal. And on the D-line, DeJoun Terry, Dominic Williams, Ethan Downs, Caden Woolard, Danny Stutzman at linebacker, and Kip Lewis, Billy Bowman, Robert Spears-Jennings, Peyton Bowen, and then Woody Washington, Gentry Williams at secondary. They're so strong defensively everywhere, but particularly the pass defense. They could have one of the best defenses in the country. The offensive line and tight end, basically the areas that are going to be blocking for the offense, specifically the quarterback or running backs, that's the area of concern. But Bill Biedenbaugh is a genius. So I think that while this offensive line will be a weak link, it won't be bad. It may just be average, above average, or good. And with Biedenbaugh, it could be great. I have Oklahoma going 8-5, 4-4 in SEC conference play, losing to Nebraska in the Music City Bowl with a 10-2 ceiling and a 6-6 floor. I just think Nebraska getting to their first bowl game in 7 years, to them, especially facing a rival Oklahoma, this will be their Super Bowl, and I don't exactly know how Oklahoma would handle what would probably be a disappointing year in their eyes. Before we resume this video, I want you, yes, College Football with Sam wants you, to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release new college football content. We're going to have Big 12, ACC, SEC record predictions and analysis in depth. Like I'm talking about 45, 50 to hour-long previews with timestamps, so you'll be able to go through and get what you need if you don't have that much time. But those are coming very soon, all within the next week. We already have a in-depth Big Ten preview out, so if you just want to go to the top right corner of your screen where my finger is, you'll see an icon there that pops up with a video link. Go check that out if you haven't already. And also, again, like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment your thoughts on my top 25 power ratings or rankings down below. And thank you so much for your time and also for your patience. So let's get back right to it and resume talking about my power ratings and rankings. Number 13, Miami. I think this actually, in that little nice segue that we had, that little break where I pitched to you my channel and why you should join what I think it eventually will be college football's best community, because I love interacting with commenters. I think this is an area of natural separation. I think after Oklahoma, from here on out, you have teams that are high octane, and I would say almost pretty close in my mind to be guaranteed to be high octane teams. Now, of course, I could be wrong because everyone's preseason rankings to a certain degree are right or wrong. It just depends on the variance. Sometimes people are very wrong. Other times, calling them wrong or incorrect all the time is nitpicking because of how many other good predictions they had. I hope I'm on the latter side of that. But we have Miami at 13th. Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas A&M for sure. I would even say Wisconsin, and there are other programs that we talked about before Miami that could be high octane, but could be. I think Miami is going to be high octane. They returned 68% of their 2023 production, bring back 11 starters, and they used the portal to their advantage. Quarterback Cam Ward is no doubt a strength on this team. Running back Damian Martinez and Mark Fletcher Jr. make up a great duo. Their O-line with Zach Carpenter, Inez Cooper, Samson Okunlola, Francis Mauigoa, Jalen Rivers is going to be awesome. Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, Samuel Brown. Could that be the best receiver core in America? Questions to ponder. And then their defense, they got Simeon Barrow Jr. from the portal, and they got Tyler Barron from the portal. Ruben Bain Jr. was awesome at defensive end last year. That's the defensive line. At linebacker, Francisco Mauigoa and Jalen Alderman are great. The secondary is an area with questions, though. It's basically the secondary and also tight end, where I think you need to see someone step up or Miami's waiting for roles to be filled. And overall, the passing defense, I think, will be the biggest weak spot of this team, losing Cameron Kitchens and other players in that DB room. How many games will Mario Cristobal give away, or won't he? Has he adjusted who he is as a coach? Can this team play consistently? Is his staff, are they good enough to be delegated all responsibility and therefore he's just the CEO? I don't know the answer to that question, but that's the storyline. And I think that this team is just so talented, and the coordinators, strength and conditioning, and assistant coaches are good enough to where this team will roll regardless of Cristobal in many situations. I have them losing to Florida State in the regular season and again in the ACC championship game, beating Arizona in the Holiday Bowl. I think they finished 12-2, 7-1 in ACC conference play because of their weak strength of schedule and the fact that I think this year, in terms of record, not in terms of quality, I think in terms of quality, this will be a down year in college football. In terms of record, due to lopsided schedules and lopsided hierarchies in the Big Ten, ACC, even a little bit in the SEC, you're going to see a ton of teams with only one loss, or even some undefeated teams, perhaps. I think Miami will be kept out of the playoff unless they win the ACC, or maybe if they're 11-1 but miss their conference championship game. Their ceiling is going undefeated, 12-0. Their floor, I think, is 8-4. At 12th, we have the Utah Utes, led by Kyle Whittingham, who I think is a top 5 head coach in all of college football. He is awesome at development, building his roster. He is like a grand master of chess. I hope that's the proper term. He's like a grand master of chess when it relates to college football, just in how tactical he is, how he builds his staff, how he builds his roster. They returned 59% of their production in 13 starters, but what we have to remember is Cam Rising didn't play at all last year. Same with Brant Kuthi. And those were great players before they got injured in 2022 and then sat out to fully rest and recover. I think also outside of them, Micah Bernard, Johnny Maya, Bernard's running back, Maya, and then Michael Mokofisi on the offensive line. Those are areas with questions. Running back and the O-line, which you wouldn't think of with Utah, but this year it is. I'm more confident in the running back room and interior of the O-line than I am at offensive tackle. The defense, though, especially the D-line, Keanu Tanuvasa, Junior Tafanu, Logan Fano, Van Fillinger, Connor O'Toole, Landon Barton, Kareem Reed. That's Utah's front. All of those players I have on my all Big 12 team. That's actually how I'm reading off these rosters, is these are all players that I have on my all-conference teams. My all-conference teams are bigger than most, but that's because there are so many great players, good, great, a few elite players as well on top of that to recognize. And Utah also has Zamiah Vaughn and Keenan Johnson at corner. This defense is going to be great. I think similarly to Kansas, roster ceiling holds this team back. They could easily be a top 10, maybe at most top 5 power rated team if we really do have a down year in quality, even downer than I think it will be. But I don't think they can win it all. Maybe they can, and maybe I'm wrong. If there's any team I'm wrong on about saying there's a limit to their roster, it would be Utah if they're healthy. But Cam Rising coming back after a year off is a big question mark. So I think he's the storyline to follow. I'm high on him, though. I think he'll do well. And I have Utah winning the Big 12, beating Kansas in the Big 12 title game. I have them going to the playoff. They'll lose in a close game to Alabama in the second round to finish 12-2, 8-1 in Big 12 conference play, with a 12-0 ceiling and a floor of 9-3. At 11th, we have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Most teams from here on out, most, will be going to the playoff in my predictions. Notre Dame's a lot like Tennessee. They don't return a whole lot, and they didn't use the portal to the degree that many other teams who are aspiring to win it all did. They only bring back 8 starters and 53% of their production, but they bring back a ton of All-Americans, particularly on defense. And Charles Joshua, or Jagasaw, butchered his name, but I think the correction saved me. It's like a quarterback throwing a pass that hits his offensive lineman, then catching it and running it for 10 yards. Even with his injury, I think the offensive line's going to be good, and I'll tell you why. Joe Rudolph, who at Wisconsin built awesome offensive lines, and they do have, I'm telling you, players that have been ready to step up for a while, whether it is just this one preseason or several years of being developed. Their center, Ashton Craig, I think is a top 25 center. I think Pat Coogan is a top 25 guard. Billy Scroth could contend for that as well. And they do have enough depth at tackle, and also Mitchell Evans at tight end, who's good at blocking, receiving, future NFL tight end, to where losing a player due to injury is devastating, but not as devastating as, let's say, a MAC school losing a talented offensive lineman, or even a lower level ACC, Big 12, Big 10, SEC school. They will find ways, especially with Mike Denbrock as the OC, to scheme around that tragic injury. And prayers up to Jagasaw. Hope that he heals and has an even better year next season. At defensive tackle with Riley Mills and Howard Cross, linebacker with Jack Kaiser, defensive back with Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts, this pass defense will be elite. The passing offense, though, with questions at offensive tackle, with Riley Leonard, we don't know how he'll do after he recovered from his injury, and the lack, I think, of X-factor wide receivers makes the passing offense a question. I think Notre Dame will reach the playoffs. They have a workable schedule, an advantage of both talent, and I think of assistant coaches and coordinators, and even head coach. I think Marcus Freeman is certainly a top 30, top 25 head coach in college football. I have Notre Dame finishing 11-2, losing to Michigan in the first round of the college football playoff in the Big House. There'll be a fun rivalry game. They could go 12-0 and beat Florida State. They could also go 9-3 and maybe lose to USC, A&M, Louisville, Georgia Tech, any number of teams. But I think this is certainly a top 15 team, and I can see why some people rank them in the top 10. We have Ole Miss at 10th. Ole Miss I have missing the college football playoff, and I will briefly tell you why. Yes, they bring back Jackson Dart, who should be an All-American quarterback. They bring back Trey Harris, who is an elite wide receiver, and I would say an All-American receiver as well. They bring back Jordan Watkins, who's a great receiver. Caden Precorn and Daquan Wright are going to be great tight ends. Walter Nolan is an impactful addition on defense. Same with Princely Unman-Malin. And their safeties, Trey Washington and John Saunders Jr., were pretty good last year. And don't forget Trey Amos, adding him in at quarterback. Or guards, two guards from Washington's Joe Moore Award offensive line last season in Nate Caleppo and Julius Buello. Ole Miss is going to be better than last year. The problem with Ole Miss, in my mind, is two things. Their run defense, I think, will have questions still, because I think linebacker's a position of weakness, and Pete Golding, I don't know if I trust him as a defensive coordinator. And running back, Ulysses Bentley, I think, is good. Remember, weak links on a team who is top 10 like Ole Miss is just an area where they're not as strong as the rest of their roster. So Ulysses Bentley's better than a lot of starting running backs in college football. But in terms of SEC caliber running backs, I need to see it to believe it. And this offensive line I don't think will necessarily be a strength of the team either. That is troublesome for Ole Miss when it comes to playing Georgia. And at LSU on the road, Oklahoma at home, who has a defense that I think could eat up Ole Miss's O-line, potentially. I think there's enough games, and the schedule's easy enough to where it's like Iowa. Unless you go 11-1 with this schedule, there's a good chance you're kept out. And I think Ole Miss goes 10-2, but they'll destroy Virginia Tech in the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl, finishing 11-2, 6-2 an SEC record. I think their ceiling's 11-1. I think they're due to lose to Georgia or someone else, likely Georgia. Their floor is pretty high, though, at 9-3. I saw ESPN said Ole Miss's floor is 6-6, and that's just heresy. This roster, while I do think it has some limitations, is deep enough to win it all if everything goes right, and certainly play for the SEC championship game if there aren't two undefeated teams or a team that's tied with them that has a stronger conference record. The question for Ole Miss is, can they compete in top 10 matchups? Not just win them. They have to compete first because they lost to Alabama and Georgia by an average of nearly 4 touchdowns last season. At 9th, we have the Florida State Seminoles. Florida State returns 56% of their production. They got 8 starters back. I think that this team here will be strong in their passing defense because of Fentrell Cypress II and Azariah Thomas at corner. At defensive end, Patrick Payton, maybe one of the best in the country. At linebacker with DJ Lunding and Cam Riley, they'll be set there as well. I think mainly, outside of the fact that I think Hakeem Williams is due for a breakout year, what makes me love Florida State is their offensive line. At tackle, Jeremiah Byers and Darius Washington. Guard, TJ Ferguson. More importantly, Richie Leonard IV. And center Maurice Smith, who I think could contend for the best center in the nation, contend for the Remington Trophy. Their offensive line, I think, is up there with Georgia's and Alabama's if they can stay healthy in terms of being the best in college football. And that means, on top of their passing defense being one of the best in the country, I do think that their overall trench play can be great. And their running offense could actually be better than it was last year, even with Trey Benson leaving, because Roydell Williams comes in from Alabama, and Lawrence Toffoli also comes back. I think Florida State's very underrated entering this year, but I understand the criticisms because of DJ Uiagalelei not being proven. The wide receivers are not proven either. I do think they'll take a step back in that department, even with improvements on the O-line and also tight end Kyle Morlock returning. The number 1 QB, the starting QB on the team, best tight end in Bell, Jaheim Bell, and Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman are off to the NFL. Who steps up and replaces them? I think Florida State wins the ACC beating Miami in the ACC championship game, and they'll reach the playoff, earning the first round bye. I have them losing in a close game to Penn State in the Peach Bowl to finish 13-1, just like last year, but on a more honorable ending note. With an 8-0 record, undefeated in ACC conference play, they have a ceiling of going undefeated, and I think they will tap into that this year. At the very worst, I think this team goes 9-3 and finishes the year ranked. At 8th, we have the Texas Longhorns. This is the final team that I have missing the college football playoff, and it's because, while their schedule is fairly easy, they do have a plethora of challenging matchups. They bring back 67% of their production from 2023 and 10 starters. The strengths of this team are quarterback Quinn Ewers, wide receivers Silas Bolden, Matthew Golden, Isaiah Bond, a tight end Amari Niblack, an offensive line that, well, I don't think it's up there in terms of Joe Moore Award caliber. Jake Majors is a veteran center. Hayden Connor's a good guard. Kelvin Banks, he's one of the best tackles in the country, could be one of the best players in all of college football. The question for Texas, I don't even think it's their defensive line, because they're great at defensive end, which I think is a strength with Trey Moore and Baron Sorrell, and I think Alfred Collins will actually be an All-American defensive tackle this year. Alfred Collins is going to be really good, one of the best defensive tackles in the SEC. But at linebacker and defensive back, even bringing in Andrew Makuba and Malik Muhammad, I think, being a decent player last year, I don't think that's enough to fix the passing defense. They were 54th in yards allowed per pass attempt last year, and Washington and Oklahoma and any passing offense that mattered just killed them. How much will their defensive backs improve in 2024? And how do they fill in the hole that losing 2 All-American defensive tackles produces? I think Texas finishes the year with a 10-3, 6-2 record in the SEC, beating Wisconsin in the ReliaQuest Bowl. This team's ceiling is insanely high, though, and they can win it all. They can go 12-0, including with a win over Georgia. They could also, in my mind, go 8-4 and lose to Michigan on the road, A&M on the road in a rivalry game. Could lose to Oklahoma again, and Georgia is just Georgia. Missouri is at 7th. And I took a little pause there to think of how to phrase this, but I think it's going to be after Missouri. Or, no, it's definitely around here, but I think before Texas. Really at 8th and on up are teams where I think their chances of winning the national championship begin to go up. And then in like the final 4-3 teams, it begins to exponentially increase. Missouri, I don't know if they have a better shot in my personal mind of winning the title than Texas does. Probably not, but it's close. And that's because they bring back over 70% of their 2023 production, 13 starters, including a veteran QB in Brady Cook. Luther Burden III is the best wide receiver in all of college football right now. And they also have Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper, an offensive line that has 4 all SEC players, including first-teamer Connor Tolinson. Little preview for my all-SEC team that you'll see in my SEC preview video. He's at center. Cameron Johnson and Caden Green are at guard. Armand Membo is at tackle. And they have Johnny Walker Jr. and Zion Young starting at defensive end. That should be a vicious pass rush. And like Texas, they did get a transfer defensive back from Clemson in Torian Pride Jr. for Missouri. Missouri's question, I think, is defensive tackle and corner. They only returned 1 of their 5 starting defensive backs from last year, and losing Harrison Mevis, especially when Missouri kicked a ton of field goals last year, that's another area to look at. Look at special teams for Missouri along with secondary play. How much will that room regress, or will it reload? I think Missouri reaches the playoffs. They have a workable schedule. They're a good team. I do think Oregon is better, though, perhaps by a significant margin, which is why I have the Ducks beating Missouri in their own house in the first round of the playoffs. Missouri will finish 11-2, 7-1 in SEC conference play, with a 12-0 ceiling and a 9-3 floor. Up next, we have the Oregon Ducks. Speak of the devil. I do think that after Missouri, though, there is a little bit of a gap separating them and Oregon and everyone else that comes after Oregon. It's similar with Texas succeeding Florida State. There's a little bit of a gap there, and then everyone else in front of them. But for Oregon, this team can absolutely win it all. They bring back 69% of their production, 10 starters, and they used the portal extremely well, just like Miami did. They got a veteran quarterback in Dylan Gabriel, who's top 5. They return running back Jordan James, who was behind Bucky Irving last year. He should be one of the best running backs in all of college football. They have Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant Jr., and Evan Stewart at wide receiver. On the offensive line, Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly Jr. are the best tackle duo in all of college football. And Matthew Bedford and Iapani Lalolu are also great interior players. Jordan Birch, Derek Harmon on the interior, Jeffrey Bossett, linebacker, and Jabbar Muhammad are other players to look out for on defense. Safety, they have a ton of transfers there battling for starting positions. That could be an area of weakness. I think also with special teams. They did bring in Atticus Sappington, so I think their kicking game will be good. But what about return specialist? What about consistent punting? Oregon's punter was good last year, but he did not have to punt that much. How efficient will Oregon's special teams unit be? More importantly, can this offense score on Big Ten defenses? Their strength of schedule last year was pretty weak, and they'll be facing tougher defenses than they've ever played against, outside of that 2022 Georgia defense. And it was game 1, so I don't take much away from that, but they also did hold Oregon to 3 points. I think the Ducks reach the playoffs, beat Missouri on the road in the first round, but lose to Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, finishing with an 11-3 record, 7-2 in Big Ten Conference play. They got a 12-0 ceiling and a 9-3 floor. We have the Penn State Nittany Lions at 5th. Penn State brings back 11 starters, 67% of their production. At running back with Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, they are tough. They have Tyler Warren, an All-American in my mind, at tight end. On the defensive line, you have Devon J. Thomas, Donnie Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter, who transitioned to D-end, Kobe King at linebacker, along with Dominic DeLuca and Tony Rojas, and Kevin Winston Jr. at safety. Defensive line play is the non-negotiable that teams will have to take into account when they play Penn State. Quarterback with Drew Aller, I think, will be an area of improvement with Andy Kotelnicki, but wide receiver is a big question mark, and I don't think Drew Aller is going to be a top 10 quarterback this year, so that makes that, in my mind, a weak link. Penn State has an awesome roster. There's also questions with James Franklin's game management, but when you hire a former head coach as your defensive coordinator in Tom Allen, and then Andy Kotelnicki, who's a genius, and I think the best offensive coordinator in the country, I think that alleviates many of the head coach concerns. Penn State was 97th in plays of 20 yards or more on offense. Can Kotelnicki fix that, especially with the limitations in the passing offense? I think Penn State goes undefeated in the regular season, beating Ohio State for the first time since 2016, but losing to them in a rematch in the Big Ten championship game. They'll beat Iowa in the first round of the playoffs, beat Florida State in the Peach Bowl the second round, but lose to Michigan in the third round of the college football playoff, the semifinals. They'll finish 14-2, 9-0 in Big Ten conference play. They got a 12-0 ceiling and a 10-2 floor. Believe me, Penn State's up there in terms of power rankings with these other big schools. It's the same thing with Michigan. Penn State, Michigan, Texas, Missouri, Oregon, and then, of course, there's Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia, the 3 most talented teams in the country, who are in my top 3 of power rankings for that and also other reasons. They're up there with those teams. Maybe not in terms of being able to beat them or even play them within one score on a neutral field, but of competing with them for 3 quarters and perhaps earning an upset against them. Michigan doesn't return a lot of production, much like Tennessee, much like Florida State, like Alabama, and others. They only bring back 5 starters as well. But running back Donovan Edwards, I think, is due for a breakout season. Tight end Colston Loveland is an awesome weapon, best tight end in the country. The offensive line, they lose a ton, but I think they will be a great O-line, not elite. I think center Greg Crippen will be the best player, along with guard Josh Preby and tackle Miles Hinton. On the defensive line, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. They also have Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, linebacker Jayshon Barham, and Ernest Hausman. And at defensive back, Will Johnson, Makari Page. You have Amir Hall. You have Jair Hill. And you have Quentin Johnson. And you have other players too. That defensive back room does have questions in terms of if all 5 of the starters are going to be great, but they do have depth. Trench warfare is the non-negotiable of this team. On average, I think Michigan will produce the best or certainly top 5 overall trench play in the country. Their weakness, though, and perhaps to a crippling degree, is their passing offense. Alex Orji's only thrown 1 career pass, so we don't even know if he's average outside of it running the ball, in which he's good. And Michigan's receivers, while they have speed, like with Samaj Morgan and Tyler Morris, we don't know how consistent they can be. So I do have Michigan making a college football run. Part of that's because this team has made a run before, and having playoff experience is going to be critical, I think, in the 12-team playoff. I have them beating Notre Dame in the first round, beating Ohio State in a rematch. They lose to them in the regular season, beat them in the Rose Bowl, beating Penn State in the Cotton Bowl, but they'll lose to Georgia, I think, by a pretty significant margin in the national championship game. I'm talking about around 2 touchdowns, maybe 3 touchdowns, but probably not playing them within 1 possession in the final box score. Michigan, I believe, goes 14-2, 8-1 in Big Ten Conference play. They have a ceiling of 12-0, undefeated record, and a floor, I think, of 9-3. We have the Ohio State Buckeyes up next. The Buckeyes, this is the team that many are high on. I have them at 3rd. They bring back 15 starters, 65% of their production. Running backs Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson highlight this team, along with wide receivers Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, a defensive line linebacker and DB core that should make up one of the best defenses in the country. You got JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, CJ Hicks, Sonny Styles, Cody Simon, all on the front. At secondary, I think they should have the best secondary in the nation and consequently the best pass defense. They have Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock, Davison Igbinosun, Lathan Ransom, and Caleb Downs. The questions I have about this team are offensive center with Seth McLaughlin and the offensive tackles. I think Donovan Jackson will anchor them well at guard. Offensive line play is the weak link of this team, and that's ultimately why I have them losing to Penn State in the regular season and Michigan in the Rose Bowl. They frankly don't match up very well with a lot of their surrounding competition. Georgia, Michigan, Penn State, I think, have favorable matchups with Ohio State because of their questions on the offensive line. For Ohio State, if they get the O-line right, and the O-line is top 10, this is the nation's best team in the country. That, along with can Chip Kelly just improve the efficiency of this offense, not just the O-line, but improve the QB play, improve the red zone efficiency, score more touchdowns, scheme the run block and the running attack to be much more efficient and deadly. That's the storyline, is Chip Kelly. I think Ohio State beats Penn State to capture the Big Ten championship in Indianapolis after losing to them in the regular season. Ryan Day will earn his 2nd win over Michigan, but then earn his 4th loss to them in the Rose Bowl. They'll finish 12-2 with an 8-1 record in Big Ten Conference play. Their ceiling is 12-0. Their floor is 10-2. And we have Alabama at 2nd. Georgia's obviously at number 1, but let's start off with Alabama. They return 11 starters, 53% of their production. Jalen Milroe, I think, is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. He completed around 66, 67, 65% of his passes last year, but when you watch the games, his passing consistency was worse than that. It was a combination of really good and then really bad games. Toward the end of the year, he improved remarkably, but he still had flaws, and that was evident in the Michigan game, the Rose Bowl. I think he'll get better at running back with Jam Miller and also Justice Haynes. I think Alabama is set for success. At center with Parker Brailsford, guard with Tyler Booker and Jaden Roberts, tackle with Caden Proctor and Elijah Pritchett. They're going to be great. I think with the coaching of Jamarcus Shepard, Jeremy Bernard, and Kobe Prentice can have breakout seasons. CJ Dupree and Josh Huevis make up a good, solid tight end room. I really like Alabama's safeties. Keon Sabb and Malachi Moore, I think, could make up the best safety room in the country. And Deontay Lawson and Jihad Campbell are great linebackers. But the defensive line, which I don't think has high ceiling octane NFL talent on it in terms of production, and also corner, are areas where there are questions. I think Alabama's run defense, as of now, and just looking at how their roster's built, is the kryptonite of this team. Same with youth. A lot of Alabama's second-string players are extremely young, and that with a tough schedule, especially if injuries begin to mount, could cause this team to not unravel in a sense that they're no longer top 10, but unravel in the way that, well, you're not going to beat Georgia a second time around. Because I think Alabama will beat Georgia off the bye at home, but lose to them in the SEC championship game, beat Liberty in the 5-seed versus 12-seed game, where Liberty's the sacrificial lamb to basically whoever's the stronger runner-up between the SEC and Big Ten. Alabama will beat Utah in the Fiesta Bowl, but lose again to Georgia. You're going to see a lot of rematches in the 12-team playoff. Lose to Georgia again in the Orange Bowl. Alabama will finish with a 14-2 record, 8-0 in SEC conference play, a ceiling of 12-0, undefeated, a floor, I think, of 10-2. I think Alabama is going to be much better than people expect this season. And finally, we have the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia, let's just face it, is the best team in college football. I think you can catch them early, whether that is Clemson, though I doubt it, Alabama on the road in week 5, maybe Texas if everything's going for them, heck, even Ole Miss. But I think once they get in the postseason, the depth that they have, they're bringing back 15 starters and 68% of their 2023 production from a Georgia team last year that arguably was a top 5 at worst, number 2 team in the nation at best unit. Carson Beck, as of now, is proven to be the best returning quarterback in college football, solely looking at statistics and not projecting anything and results. At tight end, they have Ben Urasek and also Oscar Delp. On the offensive line, which I think will be the best in the country, Georgia, they have Jared Wilson, they have Tate Ratledge, Dylan Fairchild, Micah Morris, Xavier Trust, Ernest Green III. They have 6 offensive linemen who I think have first or second team All-SEC or All-American potential. At linebacker, they have Smile Munden Jr., they have Malachi Starks at safety, and Dalen Everett at corner. This team is set to have success, and their overall roster depth, while a weakness for some teams, is Georgia's biggest strength. Is pound for pound, let's say we played a game of 8-quarter football, Georgia wouldn't lose to anyone in an 8-quarter game of football. They wouldn't. But football is 4 quarters. And if anyone's going to beat Georgia, it's going to be because they can run on the Bulldogs. And that was a problem for them last year. They allowed nearly 4 yards per carry, and they only produced around 2 sacks per game. Can that unit step up in 2024? If they can, and let's say they increase those numbers by 50%, get close to 3 sacks per game, and they only allow like 2.8, 2.9 yards per carry, this team could go 16-0. I have them going 15-1, though, losing to Alabama early with a 7-1 record in SEC conference play. They could go 12-0. They could also go as low as 10-2. I think that's their floor. I have them beating Alabama in the SEC championship game, beating Oregon in the Sugar Bowl, beating Alabama again in the Orange Bowl, and beating Michigan for the national championship. And that right there, it took a while, but it was worth it, is my top 25 power ratings. Thank you so much for watching this video. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and especially hit that notification bell if you want to see more awesome content here on College Football with Sam. We would love you to join our community and help us on the path to 20,000 subscribers. where we will be doing a giveaway. Also, the first video to reach 1,000 likes will result in a giveaway. So there are 2 giveaways awaiting you. And even if you disagree with my takes in this video, or most of my takes in general, disagreement is healthy. In fact, I have had several members of my audience correct me on things and help me to become an even better YouTuber and college football analyst. Feedback is so important. So unlike other channels who may delete comments just because, well, they disagree with the premise of the video, I encourage disagreement as long as it is healthy and you're not insulting me to death. And even then I won't delete your comment. So please join the community and let me know what your thoughts are on this video down below. Thank you to my Patreon members. I want to give a special shout out to them because of all they do for sponsoring this video and channel. Thanks to Heisman's, Crash2488, and Nebraska Rascal. Thanks to All Americans, Chris Lane, Conrad OH, and Ismar. And thank you to all conference players, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell. All of you have helped me sponsor this video and channel. For my Patreon page, I'm just going to put this out there for the next few weeks and months because it's changing. Bonus content won't be the same, but during the fall, I will be, for certain membership tiers, covering games live, maybe even doing some live reactions. I'm looking for suggestions for the Patreon page. But the most important thing is, if you want to support the channel in an extra way, join my Patreon page. The rest of the things, including merchandise, signed merchandise giveaway for 6 months of Heisman membership, is more of an added bonus. And lastly, check out my merchandise store if you want to. That and the Patreon page are both in the video description and in the pinned comment. You can get a comfortable College Football with Sam t-shirt or sweater. The t-shirts also come in 20 different themes, a black one, a white one, and then the themes of all 18 Big Ten schools. I always wear my merchandise on stream, not just to promote it, but because it's in fact very comfortable, especially the t-shirts. So look out for those, and if you want one, you can sign up as a Heisman and wait for 6 months. The more affordable option is probably just to purchase from the merchandise store, or wait for a giveaway and see if you win that lottery. I hope you have a great day, guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.